The world of Warhammer 40k is not a nice place, for in the grim darkness of the far future there is only war, and all the lovely things that war comes with: death, poverty, suffering, and a whole lot else. Yet when you're in a setting where everything just sucks, you may think that everything sucks equally. This, however, is in fact not true, and there are very many things in Warhammer 40k that are far worse than you ever thought. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we're going to be covering today, as we take a look at 5 things in Warhammer 40k that are far worse than you ever thought. But without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, let's get cracking on with today's video. Alright, so these are in no particular order, they just happen to be really bad stuff. And what better way to start off with than the Imperium of Man? Our cousins of the far future are not just ultra hyper religious zealots, they also like to do some interesting stuff when it comes to technology. But whilst you have the Mechanicum and its absolute chokehold at anything they deem advanced, there are more abstract methods that the Mechanicus uses. We know the common edge of them implying sacred unguents, as well as holy smoke, in combination with sanctificatious prayers, to ensure that the machine spirit works correctly. Yet all this pomp and fluff is not just because the Mechanicus need something to do with their daily routine, it stretches back from the Dark Age technology. The Dark Age technology was humanity's golden era, in which humanity was the greatest power, and possessed technology as well as abilities that are basically like magic. TLDR, we were really strong. So strong that we managed to weaponize time. Yeah, literally, time weapons were a thing back in the Dark Age technology. And the reason why we were able to reach such heights was due to the use of AI, unofficial intelligence, or as it has been renamed in Warhammer 40k, abominable intelligence. But you see, there would be a great war between the Men of Iron and humanity, which would leave the great human empire very fucked up. But still relatively, kinda, maybe, it could have been okay. But then, Slaanesh happened, and warp storms happened and everyone was all on their own, and the once great human empire fell to hell. Ever since then, mankind has learned its lesson. That lesson being that AI, bad. Robot, bad. Yet, humanity still needs robotic capabilities. But how do you get robotic capabilities without a robot? Simple. You take a human brain, and you make it do all the computing for yourself. Or as the old adage goes, the greatest computer is the human brain. And the Adeptus Mechanicus take this quite seriously. And that is what servitors are. Servitors are still living human beings who have been lobotomized and twisted and changed to be living computers. If you've ever seen anything like a half-human something sticking out of a something in Warhammer 40k with the Imperium, that's a servitor. Servo Skulls, also a brand of servitor. Y'all play Dark Tide and you see the Medicae and then the dude sticking out of said Medicae? Yeah, that's a servitor. Those are human beings. They've been lobotomized, they don't really know what's going on, but they are still living human beings who are using their untapped brain power to do menial labor. These are essentially robot humans, aka abominable intelligence minus the intelligence, which just means that it's abominable. Now, whilst these guys are indeed lobotomized, being a servitor doesn't always work like that. There are a couple cases in which lobotomization doesn't fully take through, or it's only partially worked, meaning that you have this chance of a human being waking up, realizing they've been mutilated, twisted and changed into a living agony of being a servant, but not a servant in a menial sense, but rather being a piece of meat, mutilated and plugged into a wall, made to calculate numbers on a star chart. Or worse, being a dismembered head, floating around at the whims of an inquisitor, with literally only your brain being the redeeming quality you have. Now that is horror enough itself, but what people don't really understand about servitors is that they are everywhere. And this is where the true horror of it comes into place. Yes, the actual surgery and creation itself is terrifying, and it's a literal reduction of the human being into a menial tool. It's like taking a human being and turning them into a computer. And just as today in our modern world we use computers for everything, servitors are used completely in Warhammer 40k for literally everything. In some cases there are literal servitor yards in which human beings are sedated, lobotomized, and then manufactured into many different types of servitors. Either monotype servitors, something like a Medicae servitor, in which they're meant to only do one single thing, i.e. be a medical servitor to administer medical aid, be a repair servitor used in like space marine nonsense or guard nonsense, or they could be an administrative servitor meaning that their job is literally only to write down shit that they Minnesota thinks is important. Spoiler alert, 9 times out of 10, that shit is in fact not important. Thus it will be forgotten, or more probably, burned. And that's the thing about servitorization. Everyone is at risk. Y'all may be thinking, oh no, it's just the lower classes, but no, we've seen examples of pretty much everyone from the Imperium get servitorized. And that's because the Mechanicus is in charge of it, so it's whoever the Mechanicus deems as bad. We have everything. We have examples of everything from ordinary citizens to guard officers to Imperial governors, even Space Marine neophytes in some cases. Even Imperial nobles. Normally being a noble of the Imperium saves you from a lot of the bullshit, but in this case, is the exception to the rule. Even being a noble means that you aren't safe from the hands of the Mechanicus. And if you want to rouse their ire, you're definitely getting put into the civilization suit. But how would a noble rouse the ire of the Mechanicus? Well, perhaps by calling the heart of their ForgeWorld an abomination. Yeah, that might do it. And such was the dumb noble Maximilian, who from the story Abomination decided to insult the Mechanicus. And the Magos who overheard him, did not think too highly of this particular Imperial noble scion. And the rest is, well, a little bit grim, shall we say. Taken from Abomination. Maximilian passed out. When he woke, he was pinned upright to an X-shaped metal cross. The air was frigid, stinking of chemicals. The scion felt groggy. He could feel where blood had dried against his chin, his severed tongue aching in a steady, dull pulse. Purple bruises blossomed over his body. After a few beats, Maximilian realized he was naked. He tried to free himself, but he was clamped in place, struggling against steel. Maximilian tried to calm himself. Some time had elapsed, even enough for Gregorius to reach the spaceport and ask the necessary questions. Damn that old man, he thought. If he had just accepted bionics for his legs, this would have never happened. He tried to look around, but his neck was clamped in place. From what you could see, the room was small, almost like a cell. Its walls were cluttered with medical apparatus, a servo-arm clamp on one side, and a Medicaid mechadendrite on the other. No one else seemed to be in the room with him. Gregorius will be here soon, Maximilian assured himself. It's almost over, he started, as the door opened. A servitor gazed blankly at him, struggling under the weight of a curved metal plate. Behind was a tech adept. Maximilian moaned in fear. His voice sounded strange without his tongue. The servitor approached with faltering steps. It might have been a female once. There was something feminine about the tuft of dead hair that reached down from its shoulders. From the right side of its scalp. Either way, it did not respond to Maximilian's muffled pleas, slamming the metal plate onto his chest with crushing force. The tech adept stepped forwards with an electro drill. Behind it, a line of servitors watched silently, carrying tools, bionic gears, and wires. Maximilian screamed as the tech adept drilled the metal plate into his body, feeling his skin corkscrew away as the nails were fixed to his shoulder blades and ribs. His vision swam in agony, returning to sharp focus as the wall-mounted medical mechadendrite injected him with a concoction of life-saving chems. He felt his blood swim from the holes the tech adept made in him, running like lubricant between his flesh and the plate. Another servitor stepped forward, handing the tech adept an electro drill before bowing back. It buzzed to life, slicing through the skin of Maximilian's shoulder before finding resistance at the bone. The scion howled, fighting wildly against his restraints. The wall-mounted servo arm pinned him down as the left arm ripped away, his underarm skin tearing and giving way to spatter of blood. The next servitor entered, presenting a grubby bionic. The tech adept pinched at Maximilian's exposed nerve fibers, cleaning them off bone and skin as the blood flowed in steady bursts. The medical mechadendrite injected Maximilian again as the tech adept reverently took the bionic arm, challenging to the Omnissiah as it unswilled wiring from the augment's inner workings. With delicate metal hands, the tech adept wove wires around the nerve fibers and soldered them together. As Maximilian shrieked, the tech adept fed the wires back into the bionic arm, positioned it against the scion's shoulder, and reached once more for the electro drill. Maximilian continued to howl. Some innermost portion of his mind urged him to speak, to tell the tech adept there had been a mistake, but the pain was too great for him to manage anything but screams. He stared with horror at the bionic arm, as the medical mechadendrite applied another dose of stim. It was an ugly thing, too large for his frame, dragging him downwards against the clamps. It was a thing fit only for a menial wrench, a hideous, unspeakable thing. He convulsed as a lumen charge spasmed through his body. He spat fizzing blood on his metal chest. The tech adept applied the electro drill to Maximilian's other arm. The sawed bone left behind a wide sheen of dust, shaded with crimson as his right arm tore away. Then the pinch, the white-hot agony of metal against nerve fibers, the soldering, the drill. Maximilian wheezed distantly. He realized he wasn't screaming anymore, his throat lacerated and useless. He tried to think. There was a name, someone who might still come, but it was hard to think past the pain and the animal part of his mind that screamed in tortured terror. It was like a secret something that still might save the Scion if he could only remember a name. A name. The Scion was dimly aware of intense pressure against his torso. The tech adept was attaching metal girders to the plate, building an exoskeleton to support the immensely ungainly weight of Maximilian's bionic arms. A sharp pain in Maximilian's neck signaled another stim injection. Another spasm of lumen sent him convulsing. He gaped down at his body, a scaffolding of bloody metal parts. Inhuman, not his. Maximilian wanted to scream, but it hurt to even breathe. Suddenly, he had the absurd thought that this couldn't be real, that he was about to wake up, that this couldn't possibly be happening to him. Next, the tech adept took his legs. Shuffling servitors brought in replacements, clunking things with exposed rusted gears. Maximilian's eyes rolled back as the agony began anew. He didn't even notice when the tech adept castrated him with pincered calipers, his mutilated genitalia flopping limply to the blood-soaked ground. When it was finally over, another dose of stim jolted him into focus. The tech adept stood appraising him with cold green eyes. The Scion could feel a tremendous weight dragging on his skin, a new terrible mass that pulled him towards the earth. He tried to look at the tech adept, but he could barely lift his head. He grunted, spitting blood as the tech adept reached out with a hand and took him by his broken chin, inspecting him like a prize grox. A thin, winding mechadendrite unspooled from beneath the tech adept's robes, uncoiling towards the Scion's face. This isn't real, Maximilian thought. The thin mechadendrite burrowed up Maximilian's right nostril, finding the young Scion's frontal cortex. With a series of small snips, the tech adept severed the cortex from the rest of the brain, and Maximilian never thought in words again. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is just a small taste of the horror of servitorization. Now again, imagine that on a factory-wide scale, with every single person imaginable. Now, whilst that particular servitization might have been an exception to the rule, it doesn't mean it's the only instance that we have of it. The long and short of it is this. In the Imperium, servitorization is to take a human being, to mutilate them and twist them into nothing but a living computer, and it can happen to anyone, for any reason, because the Imperium always needs more computers. And the one thing that the Imperium has in spades of is living human beings. For the price of life in the Imperium is cheap, and a servitor is actually quite expensive. Besides, who will miss a few random humans when the work of the Omnissiah is in need of completion? Brutal, cruel, but efficient. Kinda. The Imperium in a terrible, bloody nutshell. But from the living computers of the Imperium to the unliving monstrosities of the Necrons, let's talk about the flayed ones next. The flayed ones are a unique subsection of Necrons. Essentially, these Necrons have been infected by the so-called Flayer virus. Now, this virus causes them to slowly go insane, but it also makes them crave skin. Thus, as the name suggests, they have a habit of flaying mortal flesh, removing the flesh and the skin, and then wearing the skin over them, like some type of fucked up coat. Yet the question is, why? Why on earth would they do this? That's because, ladies and gentlemen, the virus is the last spiteful goodbye of a Khitan known as Londugor, the Flayer. One of the very few Khitans who were able to be destroyed outright. This chap may have been gone, but he wasn't going to let the Necron forget them. Thus it is said that in those final moments, he laid a curse upon the Necron, and this curse would be one that would come from him, the same that he had, that being the hunger for flesh. Thus, after the entombment of the Necron, they would be horrified to discover that many of their brethren would become inflicted with this virus, which again would cause them to go mad and to flay their opponents. The thing is though, the Flayer virus is not just them going mad and having the need to flay their opponents. It's much more sinister than that. For the effects of the Flayer virus can be measured in two separate instances, the first being the mental and the second being the physical. The physical we know quite well, being covered in blood, gore, viscera, wearing skin, all crazy, very nasty, very good aesthetic but really dirty. That we do know of. The second one that we don't really know much of but is far more important, at least in my opinion, is the mental aspect to it. For it's revealed in the book Twice Dead King Ruin that the Flayer virus is not just the curse of Landugorath causing the Necrons to go mad to crave flesh, there's another part to it, what is known as the Dysphorak. Now that may sound very similar to dysmorphia, and I think that's on purpose. The Dysphorak is essentially the crushing realization that the Necron tier have been turned into the Necrons, i.e. biotransference. What is that, you may be asking? You see, way back when in 40k's prehistory during the War in Heaven, the Necrons were the Necron tier. The Necron tier were beings made of flesh, but they lived very short lives, because their sun was radioactive and cancerous, which caused them to die very early. They would then go to the Old Ones, who were basically the best of the best, and ask them to help them extend their lives. The Old Ones, for one reason or another, said no, which then caused them to have a war. The Old Ones kicked the Necron tier shit in so hard that they went back right to square one. It was at this point that they would meet the Catan, a particular Catan, mind you, known as the Deceiver, a very trustworthy guy. Xali King Sarek, yes that's Sarek, would end up trusting the Catan. Thus, the two would join forces, and the Catan would instruct the Necron tier on creating these giant furnaces. Apparently, these furnaces would quote-unquote replace the cursed flesh that the Necron tier had, and grant them immortality. And it did. As the Necron tier walked through, their cursed flesh was replaced by living metal, known as necrodermis. Though the Catan didn't tell them that, the Catan also didn't tell them that they would be gobbling up their souls, leaving them as soulless automata, at least with the lesser cost. The nobles and some upper echelons still retained some basic sentience, but their soul, however, was completely gone. This sudden shock of biotransference led to a bunch of trauma, and that trauma is solidified in the Dysphorak. Instead of me waxing on poetically, I will just sum up the Dysphorak in one sentence. I have no mouth, but I must scream. This is essentially trauma of them used to being normal flesh and blood beings, but now they're these living metal monstrosities. They don't have skin anymore. They don't have a heartbeat. They don't breathe. They can't feel heat on their skin. They don't know what it is to be hurt. They can't hold warmth in their hands, in their hearts. They don't see the way that we see. Everything about their being is completely different. Yet, in some cases, especially with the nobles, they themselves are still the same. They still feel the same, they still have the same needs and urges, but they lack the ability to perform these normal things that we humans take for granted. These very natural, normal, lovely, beautiful things. They have the desire, but not the ability. They must scream, but they have no mouth. They must breathe, but they have no lungs. They must feel, but they have no nervous system. They must eat, but they have no stomach. Now, in regards to the Dysphorak and where it comes from, it's believed that Ladrugor's curse has some meaning to this. He had something to do with this, but it's unsure whether this was completely his idea or it was more of an accentuation of an already ill that the Necrons had. That being obsession. The Necron tier were obsessive. It's the idea that they began to obsess over what they didn't have and what they wanted, and this carried on into their mental state. They obsess over what they don't have, what they don't possess. In this case, the flesh body. Now, as to what exactly it is, I can't really say, but I do like the idea that this is Landrugor's final curse. The idea that you obsessed over life, well, I'm going to amplify that obsession. I curse you to always know, to always feel the needs of a being of flesh, but never being able to meet them. So much so that it drives you mad, that you have to go and find these lesser creatures who you hate and flay them alive to satiate your blood hunger madness. That's what I think. That is totally my opinion, and I prefer that. I like that idea to them. But me telling you about the horror of the Dustvorak doesn't do it justice. And to really hammer home the point how this could affect any Necron, even a scion of a dynasty, let's take a look at an excerpt from Twice Dead King Ruin. Eventually, despite his every effort to abide by doctrinal warnings against compassion, he could think of nothing else but how hellishly plain, how utterly empty the world was to an ordinary Necron warrior. At first he reassured himself that he still had it worse, as the former commoners didn't have the presence of mind to be aware of the state they were in. But with nothing else to distract him, he was forced to realize that he only knew this because he had been assured of it by other nobles. He had certainly never asked a warrior. In the end, he was forced to retreat to the premise that even if the rank and file were just as conscious as he was, there was no way they could be dismayed at their lot. Because unlike him, they had never enjoyed a richer experience of the world, and how could they feel a sense of loss when they had never known anything more? This reasoning felt safe, to the extent where he resolved to forget about the topic altogether, and move on to counting the shrieks and alien blood oaths as they rang out beyond his cell. But he had not even managed to lose count of the sounds 3 times before the thought that was to undo him altogether drifted through his flux. The warriors had once known something more because they had been alive, just like him. The notion was impressed on his very deepest flux, as if by a talon made from cold starlight, and through it, the smallest pinprick puncture, it was backed by the accumulated weight of 1,000 things he had tried to forget. Terror radiated from the thought, like cracks shooting across a frozen lake as he stood at its center, and beneath the ice, a huge and silent shadow cruised. Before Oltex could even fathom what he was afraid of, the whole brittle structure shattered at once, and he was plunged into a deeper, colder darkness than that of his blindness. As he began to sink, Oltex looked down into the abyss at the center of himself. The abyss stared back, the Dustvorak, and it was no longer a phantom, but a monster now, swollen from the pain that throbbed along every cut in his now distant body. Its screams, once faint and muffled, was deafening now that he was down in the dark with it, with no allies to shield him, nor any possibility of violence as an escape vector. He could only hang in the nothingness as it circled beneath him in the frigid gloom. He needed to escape, but there was nowhere left to go. He had been running for so long now, and while his pursuer had never tired, growing stronger with every horror he left unthinkingly behind him, he had at last reached a dead end. Not even a guard echoed Mentep's voice as the shadow of the Dustvorak rose from the Barathum and engulfed him. As Oltex descended into the total blackness of his jaws, he knew the Dustvorak did not want to hurt him as such. After being trapped in the dark for millions upon millions of years, deprived of everything it had ever known, it just wanted company. It wanted someone to share its pain with, was all. But now that pain had surrounded him and was dragging him down into itself, his skin was touching nothing as he sank. The baroceptors, searching for his blood pressure, found only the searing touch of radioactive gas. His stomach had been empty for aeons, and was burning with the sure knowledge he had starved 10,000 times over. His heart was not beating, his blood had gone still, and his organs were failing. Cells dying by the billions as they choked on their own waste. He could feel the brain he did not have, desperately begging for oxygen as its tissues began to blacken. His phantom lungs were flat and stiff as a leather discs inside his chest. They would not inflate. He needed to breathe. He needed to, or he was going to die. He clawed at his own throat, desperate to clear the obstruction, but there was nothing there but solid metal. His hard fingers scrabbled against his face, but there was no mouth, no nostrils. His whole form was solid and sealed, with no way to inhale. None of his phantom parts could do anything to save themselves, but neither could they collapse, because they did not exist. They would be trapped here forever, in the lurid, bleeding urgency at death's edge. Even as he continued to fall, Altek ceased to be Necron. His perspective flipped, and the reality of the abandoned brain vestige became his own. He was no longer a construct burdened with a malfunctioning scrap of transcribed biology, but a creature of living flesh that had suddenly been punctured by cold metal in every part of himself at once. Now, the remains of his mortal body were flensed away strip by strip. There was nothing left except rough iron bones, cradling a cold green star where there should have been a heart. Altek wanted to scream, but he had no mouth. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the true horror of the Dasvarak and the Flayer curse. But whilst the Dasvarak is something that every Necron will experience at least one point in their lives, those being the sentient ones, that is, things like nobles, etc., those who can still think and remember on their own accord, they will experience that and the horror that it comes with. But what of those who experience it too much? What of those who are overwhelmed by it? What of those who are swallowed by the darkness? Well, to them, Landugor's final gift is given. To them, they become Flayers, creatures lost in the madness of wanting to scream but having no mouth. So, they will become human again, one way or another. In their lost madness, they wear the skin and viscera of defeated enemies, in some terrible and vain parody of their former cursed flesh lives. And so they live, hidden in terrible places, with naught but the darkness to fill their terrible minds. That is the true horror of the Flayers, and ultimately, perhaps the entire Necron race. But from one terrible Xenos nonsense to another, let's take a look at the Dark Eldar Mandrekes. Mandrekes are one of those units where everyone kinda forgets they exist, and then they see them on a tabletop, or they see them on an article or the cover of a codex or on a piece of art, and like, oh yeah, these guys. Yet for what they are and how fucking terrible they are, they really are slept on, because these guys are not something you should just ignore. These are terrible. Oh Brad, but how bad could they be? So bad, in fact, that to other Dark Eldar avoid them. Yeah, these guys freak out other Dark Eldar. Everyone. Even Vec doesn't want to deal with these boys, because they murdered him, supposedly. Yeah, so these guys are not something you want to fuck with. Aside from looking completely badass, they are incredibly effective as assassins and hunters. Yet, what exactly are they? And for that, let's take a crack at a codex. Taken from Codex Dark Eldar, 8th edition. Within the shrouded corners of a labyrinthine dimension, lurk all manners of nightmarish entities and subconscious terrors given form. Yet nowhere in the webway is more shrouded in dread than the Elendrak, where darkness itself has gained a sort of horrifying sentience. For it is home to the creatures known as Mandrekes, a vile breed that is secretly feared even by other Drukhari. A Mandrake can pull itself into reality straight through another being's shadows, emerging with a hiss to sink its ice-cold claws and teeth into warm flesh. Their inky skin writhes with forbidden runes, and their faces shift and flow. One moment, sealing over into an expressionless mask, the next, parting like a reopened wound filled with needle teeth. Mandrakes exist in both reality and a cursed other world, and to fight them is to fight a living shadow. But they are not fully corporeal. As the tangibility ebbs, shots pass harmlessly through them, though the same is not true of the Mandrake's own attacks, which always land with visceral physicality. They are able to manifest anywhere that shadows gather in the gloom, and as such, are a malevolent bane on night worlds and in war zones that are veiled in darkness. The true origins of Mandrakes remain shrouded in time and secrecy. Some Eldari savants claim that the Mandrakes are descended from those of their species inhabiting the webway, who before the fall of the Eldari engage in heinous acts of lust with demonic entities of the warp. when the Lost Eldar Empire was at its most decadent. Others hold that the living shadows are descendant from a forbidden Eldari pleasure cult that found its own way to escape the devastation of the fall, fleeing into a nightmare dimension of shadow within the immaterium and re-emerging as something no longer quite natural. Young Drukhari call the Mandrekes creepers and whisper that they crawl from one shadow to another and can emerge from one's reflection into the real universe. They believe that Mandrakes are the absence of light given life, and in that, they may very well be right. All those wild theories do not seem so far-fetched when one considers the Mandrakes' appearance. Their flesh is cold dark and seems to absorb rather than reflect light. Their features shift like oil, and their lank hair is as pale as splintered bone. Surrounding them is an aura of darkness and cold that saps the strength of those nearby. Often the first sign of a Mandrake attack will be a thin rime of ice hanging in the air. The twisting shapes set in their flesh are sigils of destruction that pulse brightly whenever the Mandrake feeds upon the pain of its prey. Mandrakes are capable of channeling these stolen energies, shaping blasts of cold fire that roar out of their claws to freeze the victims in place. When they fall upon their shuddering prey, they do so not only with talon and fang, but also with blood-encrusted glimmer steel blades that are reminiscent of the surgical tools of the homunculi. And that, ladies and gentlemen, brings me to the crux of the Mandrakes. These guys are not in fact Dark Eldar. Whilst at one point they might have been, now they are something altogether different and bloody terrifying. Kamara is a place that has many sub-dimensions to it. The witches have their own, so do the homunculi, and the Mandrakes are no different. But with the Mandrakes, there might even be a sub-realm to their sub-realm. The Mandrakes reside in a place called the Alendrak. Now this place used to be a satellite realm of the Eldar Empire, kind of like a vassal state or something, and it was known for its ancient and exotic treasure, though one thing led to another and it was overcome by a great calamity, which then transformed it into the Alendrak that we know today, that being a murderous shadow realm inflicted with these shadow ghouls, which may or may not have been the former residents. As to what that great cataclysm might have been, some postulate that it could have been the Midnight Dimension. Now, as to what the Midnight Dimension is, it's not really known. It could be a sub-realm of space or it could be a sub-dimension of the warp. But what we do know is that it's inhabited by shade demons. And there is a portal to said dimension in the Alendrak. So, if we take everything and put it together, we could combine all of these together to get an origin story for the Mandrakes. Because we take the two examples we have in the Codex, that them being Eldar who banged the demon, or them being a pleasure cult that managed to escape during the fall, put them together. It could be that the Mandrakes are the descendants of an Eldari pleasure cult that managed to find the great calamity, that being the portal opening into the Midnight Dimension. The shadow demons then surged through the Alendrak and murdered everyone, assumingly. From there, these Eldar pleasure cults that were left had only one choice, to join with these so-called shadow demons and bang them. Because if a Dark Eldar is going to do one thing, it's going to be banging. That offspring and their descendants then became the Mandrakes, connected not only to the Alendrak, but more importantly, the Shadow Realm and the Shade Demons, essentially them being half demon, half Dark Eldar. That would explain their supernatural appearance. They don't reflect light. They absorb, but they can transfer through shadows. They have demonic magical powers. I mean, I call that a demonic magical power. And if you think about demonic magical powers that involve absorbing light and moving through shadows, having something called a shade demon be the source of it makes sense to me. But regardless of what exactly and the exact details the Mandrakes have with the Midnight Dimension, the fact of the matter is thus. The Midnight Dimension is a dimension filled with shadow demons. It is directly connected to the Alendrak, which is the home of the Mandrakes of the Dark Eldar inside of Kamara, and the Mandrakes can literally travel through shadows. Mandrakes, for all intents and purposes, are part shadow demon, or they're Eldari shadow demons. But regardless of all that, they are terrible, they are horrible, and they are utterly nightmarish. They're also really fucking cool. Now, shadow demons would be one thing, but these aren't just any regular shadow demons, these are Eldar shadow demons, as I previously said. And they're still Dark Eldar, which means they still enjoy inflicting pain on other people. Now, you combine sadism with shadow demon powers, I imagine that that's not a good time for any civilian, especially a civilian on a night world. I mean, I imagine a night world filled with the civilian populace is just like a candy store to a mandrake. That would actually make a really good, like, terror novel. Fun fact, I wonder if that's why them and the Night Lords always pitted against one another. Oh, it makes sense to me. But from the demons of shadow of the Dark Eldar to the holy lighted Sisters of Battle, let's talk about Penitent engines next. Now, with the Sisters of Battle, I was not short of options for really bad things. The lobotomized murder servitors playing holy music at goddamn high volumes, known as the Occoflagellants, were the first thing to come to mind. The second being the rather simply clad, at least in prior editions, big fuck-up sword-wielding, mad-raving Repentia. And I'm pretty sure I could have found some other stuff in looking at the Ecclesiarchy. But the two that I centered on were what I believe is the most fucked up and far more worse than you ever think of. That being the Penitent engines and especially the Mortifactors. But to truly understand these, we gotta understand a little bit of how the Imperium and the Ecclesiarchy works. To the Imperium, death is not the end. There is of course an afterlife with the Emperor, but that position must be guaranteed. And to the Ecclesiarchy, whilst you may have failed in your physical flesh, there is still your immortal soul to save. But how do you save the immortal soul? Pain, usually. Flagellation, in every single version of that word, is a very key part of the Ecclesiarchy. The idea that one can be rehabilitated through pain and suffering is a core element of the Ecclesiarchy. Because whilst you may have forfeited your mortal life, if we fuck you up enough, the Emperor will welcome you. How that works, don't ask me, but hell, it's what the Ecclesiarchy believes. And the worse your fuck up, the more pain you need. Thus, that then brings us to the Penitent engines and the Mortifactors. Taken from the Adeptus Sororitas, Codex 8th edition. To be a pilot of a Penitent engine is to have committed a terrible crime, one so heinous that the punishments are deemed too lenient. Many of the unfortunate sentenced to pilot a Penitent engine were once members of the Ecclesiarchy, priests fallen from grace, or sisters who have caused the death of their fellows. One so judged is wired into the crucible of a Penitent engine, where torment amplifiers are spliced into their synapses and chemical injectors implanted into their spines. From that point on, the helpless individual is subjected to endless suffering, their mind stripped of all thought, except physical pain and spiritual guilt. The pain itself driving the Penitent engine's actuators and servos. Penitent engines charge towards the foe heedless of danger, knowing that only in death, theirs or the enemy's, can absolution be earned. The arms of the engine, mounted with enormous flamers, blaze a trail of fiery destruction as it thunders forwards. Upon reaching the enemy, the chemical and synaptic inputs pumped into the pilots are altered, causing them to see their own face and the faces of their foes, thrashing at those before them, each a reflection of their unfathomable guilt. They rampage through the enemy battle lines, leaving death and carnage in their wake. Some engines bear adamantine tooth buzz blades that are capable of cleaving through plated tank armor, while others mangle flesh and pulverize bone with lashing swings of their multi-headed flails. Penitent engines are often deployed beside the ranks of the Order's militant. The Sisters of Battle consider it their sacred duty to witness these great machines in the fires of combat, observing the actions of their fallen brothers and sisters as they atone for past sins. Every enemy slain by a Penitent engine's brutal stampede proves the righteousness of this form of punishment. Aside from the unthinkable act of outright heresy, there is no greater sin amongst the Adeptus Sororitas than when a Repentia flees from battle. The sole duty of these sisters is to atone for their failings in battle, and to run from this fate is an evil for which there can be no forgiveness. As punishment, these wayward Repentia are wired into the crucible of a mortifier. Based upon the same mechanical chassis as a Penitent engine, a mortifier bears additional neuroagonizer rays and oblique enhancers that amplify the pilot's self-loathing exponentially. Metallic bolts driven into the Repentia's bones leave her unable to move or even scream for death, while the baffle hood placed over her head prevents her from hearing any words of piety that are spoken in her presence. Mortifactors are then placed on the front lines of battle, where they are driven into a frenzy by intense spiritual suffering of their pilots. The engines lurch forwards with terrifying speed, leg pistons firing and contracting in the same time with a rapid jolt of anguish that shoot through the interred sisters. As they bound forwards, they spray hails of bolts and torrents of flames from their arm-mounted weapons before launching themselves at the enemy, carving a path of mutilation. All joy that would come from seeing heretics torn to shreds is denied to the repentia, stripped from their minds and replaced with more pain. Their only hope of release from this torment, from this cruel existence outside the Emperor's light, is to find oblivion in death. And yet, when a mortar fire has sustained an obscene amount of damage, the sister from within senses that her end is at last approaching. The pain of knowing that she will die unredeemed sends the machine into a tortured death throe, a wild and final whirlwind of devastation. To those repent who not only fled, but betrayed the sisters in battle, an even worse fate awaits. After being wired into the crucible of their mortar fire, they are further entombed behind thick adamantine casing. This sarcophagus protects their tormented bodies from incoming fire and desperately swung blades, denying them the release of death. Known as anchorites, the sisters behind these lifeless masks are forced to face their torment in absolute isolation, enduring years or even decades of agony before meeting their end. Hello, daily reminder to those who need to hear it, the Imperium are certainly not the good guys. In fact, there is a very strong case for them being the bad guys. So yes, in the Ecclesiarchy and the Sisters of Battle, if you make a mistake, a very bad mistake mind you, but a mistake in which they deem that there is only one type of punishment, they will strap you into a pain engine. Every single one of your senses is fed pain and suffering and self-loathing. And if you happen to be a Sister of Battle doing this, or a pension no less, they then chuck you in a giant fuck-off adamantine coffin. Adamantine is much stronger than steel. That's the shit that Space Marine power armor is made out of, mind you. Well, that and ceramite. And that is the true horror of Penitent engines. It's not the fact that the Imperium has this type of punishment. It's the level of contempt that is shown towards these peoples. The Mortifactors are a perfect example. To become a repentia, you have to fail your sisters in battle. You were scared, you ran away. Cowardice. Cowardice is one of the biggest sins of the Imperium. Because it doesn't matter what your biological senses say, you betrayed the Emperor, and you did that all on your own. That's all your fault. You are completely, totally, and utterly to blame for that. It doesn't matter if you were facing, I don't know, a giant 8-foot tall fucking demon bug, or anything like that. You ran. It doesn't matter that you got scared. You made the conscientious decision to run. That's on you. Even though it was a biological response, we don't care. And as a sister, you did that again. So, you have failed. Wholly, totally, and utterly. So we are going to ensure that you suffer in self-loathing and hatred. They cover their ears so they can't even hear, like, sermons. These are sisters, these are very religious people, so not even being able to hear sermons anymore, only hearing and seeing yourself as a heretic, with pain flooding your body, with self-loathing and, like, probably depression flooding your body. Like, this punishment is the definition of hatred. The Ecclesiarchy, the sisters, if they hate you, if they despise you, if they think that you are not worth it, they will put you in a pain engine, either a mortifactor or a penitent engine. I also find it super funny how they call the most extreme version of these anchorites, when the anchorite's whole story was him being forgiven by the Imperium and allowing to continue serving, yet this is not forgiveness. This is hatred masked as forgiveness. And I guess that goes to show the sisters as a whole. The sisters and the Ecclesiarchy is the corruption of spiritualism. It is the worst aspect of religiousness, period. In fact, it forgets the lessons. The Emperor is supposed to be this all-merciful, beneficent Emperor. Yet there's a bunch of these little asterisks that you gotta read in the contract, like fucking terms and conditions. Hey, you ran away? Yeah, that means you're a coward, so we're going to kill you. But in the most grotesquely slowest way possible that may last years, because we hate you. And whilst this might be one of the most terrible fates for anyone in the Imperium, it sums up the Imperium pretty well. The Imperium is so utterly fucked up that hate is not something to be abhorred. Hate is a virtue. Hate is good. And I can think of little things more that truly show that you hate a motherfucker than to drill their bones into a fucking super metal coffin and strap them onto what is basically a dreadnought. I've said it once, I'll say it again. The Sisters of Battle are one of the most evil factions in all of Warhammer 40k. But goddammit are they hot though. I would do it, sister. It would probably be the end of me. No, it would most definitely be the end of me, but I would. But from the holy sanctimonious nonsense of the Sisters of Battle and the Ecclesiarchy, to the dark, grimy, and gritty underhives of the Imperium, let's finish today's video talking a little bit about some of the worst experiences you can have in the Imperium, the underhives. Ah yes, hive worlds. But we're not just going to be talking about hive worlds, because there are some hive worlds in which you can live a pretty okay life, you know, pretty decent. Hell, it's pretty similar to some of the lives that people live nowadays anyway. And when it comes to living in worlds in the Imperium, it really does depend. There are paradise worlds, there are agri worlds, there are civilized worlds, which are basically our modern day Earth in 40k. They're all different types. But what I really want to focus on are the underhives. Hive worlds are so incredibly popular in the Imperium. A good chunk of the worlds in the Imperium are hive worlds. And while some hive worlds are better than others, every single hive world has an underhive. And the underhives, regardless of how good they may be, are still some of the worst experiences humanity can suffer. Imagine slums or ghettos, those bad parts of town where people merely squeak by living, in which it is a triumph if you manage to get a loaf of bread that day. A life where the idea of growing, of learning, of advancement is just non-existent. Not only is it non-existent, you can't conceive of it. It truly is the most earnest form of neo-subsistence living. The only thing that you are ready to do, the only thing that you are capable of doing, the only thing on your mind of doing is making it through the next day. Most people that we live nowadays, we have great dreams. We have dreams of starting our own business, getting a degree, moving in another country, etc. In the underhive, their dream is being safe every day. Their dream is a warm meal every day, of a soft bed every day. Now, oftentimes, many people tend to over-exaggerate some parts of 40k, or they don't really understand it that much, but the underhive is one of those parts where no, there is no over-exaggerating an underhive. An underhive is one of the worst places a human can live. An underhive is the reality of scarcity living in our own real world, but magnified 40,000 times. Now I could go on and on and on, but I think it's a lot better if I give you an actual example from in-world. Taken from the novel Junction, released in 2005. This is the normal day of a successful lampman or electrician in the underhives of Hive Necromunda. The third was the trail out to Tarvo, lit and patrolled courtesy of Junction and the Berserkers, the Orlog gang who made Tarvo their own. I took a deep breath and a glance at the half-ruined walkway buttress above me, littered with corpses, and I started walking. Work, that was what I needed. Good back-bending, mind-clearing work to get it all out of my mind. All this trouble had proved my point. In the underhive, it doesn't pay to get attached to people. You need to be able to just turn and walk away. Walk away from the water rioters, or the bodies of other lamplighters, or the town where you'll never see your mother and sister again, or the homestead where your father is. I shook my head to clear it. This is what happened when you let things get to you. I said ahead instead. Tanny hadn't looked much like me. She had a heart-shaped face where mine was lean. Her hair thick and dark like our mother's, instead of thin and almost colorless like mine. Ruddy, vigorous complexion. I dimly remember our father having good color in him like that, back before he took sick. She was always a quiet one, learned to keep out of the way and take care of herself. Once our father was gone, the three of us realized we'd lost whatever little claim we might have on the charity of the Hive City outskirts, and we each had to pull our own weight if any of us were to make it. I think I even remember my mother saying that to me as we left. She was the only one of us not crying. I rescued what I could from father's little machine shop, but it wasn't enough. For some reason, having to leave his tools behind was still what hurt the most about leaving. Just walk away from it. She told us over and over in the yellow-lit road pipe, just keep your eyes ahead and walk away. We'd wandered the highest, safest stretches, keeping as close to the Hive City as the house militias let us, and Tanny had learned to keep out of the way. She was too small to work, and small enough to get lost or be taken. The memory keeps coming back of her brown eyes peering out of the side of a wagon, or a bolt hole in some dirty little town, looking out at me as we worked or walked. I used to wave to her. The one and only humiliating time my mother resorted to outright begging, we were rousted by the first real underhive gangers I'd seen. We both swore that would never happen to us again, and started going deeper into the underhive. I was getting better with my father's tools, And although I didn't have the swagger or the Hive City breeding to run with a gang, that was no great loss. The Underhive chewed up a dozen gang juice every day, but it had better things to offer a young man who knew juice and circuit work, and was good with his hands. After a while, Tanny was old enough to start going out on her own, trapping rats and shoot dogs, the way she and I had done in the crawlways around Old Stead. She taught herself to tan and sell the hides, learned to use a knife, and to shoot the little holdout stubber I got her. She learned brewing too. There was always a few creds going for someone who knew how to run a still, no matter where in the Underhive you are. When life on the road started taking more out of our mother than she could spare, it was a good skill to have. We lived in a little settlement made of cavities in the walls, and ceiling over the road pipe between Drifter's Wake and Scorched Town. Fair amount of traffic. Tanny helped serve rot gut to the gangers and traders, while I tinkered with their broken kit in my little nook at the top of a ladder in the road pipe wall. If I knew what had happened to her, it would be a lot easier. She had pumped her head over the top of my ladder to see if I'd finished heat shaping the new pipes her boss needed for the still, and stuck her tongue out at me when I told her no. She waved over the shoulder as she vaulted down the ladder, and walked back under the nest of spring lights to the tunnel chopped into the pipe wall that led to the drinking den. I know that for a few minutes after that, she was serving half a bottle of second best to a pair of sump gummies who were passing through looking for bounty work. They took a shine to her, they said, and later on, they were the ones who helped me try and find her. But they didn't find anything, neither did I, and the people who came past on the road knew nothing. I even paid a rat skin in money and the booze Tanny had brewed for him to tell me that neither of the local tribal camps had seen her. She walked back across the road pipe, back up to me, waggling her fingers over her shoulder, and there it stops. That memory. She was 16. My mother went a year after that. The tiredness that had ended our travels turned out to be white choke, picked up from some spore-rotted place along the lower trails, and never knowing about Tanny, ate at her the way it did me. In the Underhive, it never pays to get too attached to people, but sometimes you can't help it. She and I hung on at that shitty little waypost, and when the choke finally took her, I burned her and hit the road within a week. At least with her I knew what happened. I had been there at the end, holding a cup of water to her lips. I carried her down out of her loft, and then I walked away. Words to live by, I slurred, and giggled at the way it sounded. It was the only way you could live in the Underhive. Live light. Always be ready to walk away. I turned and walked away from Safine. She told me I could, right? So, I shouldn't have stayed. I could walk away. I did. Like I walked away from Enning. What a pity they wouldn't let me take him in. But there was nothing I could have done. I had another mouthful of snake. All I could do was walk away. Not my problem. Gotta walk. My hands were unsteady, but I managed to scrub the last of the lukewarm grime off myself with a rag, straightened as much as I could and groaned. It wasn't as clean as I wanted, but I'd done what I could. I lurched unsteadily back into my pallet and toppled onto it. Good turn of words that, to almost wanting me to spy and report. Well, I did all I could. To Nardo, lying half-broken somewhere and waiting for me to bring him his water. Well, I did all I could. Safine, standing on her cart outside the junction gates, left with the steelheads. I did what I could. Was it true? I didn't know. It was the kind of thing I like to practice saying. The best I could. I just do my job. More than it's worth to get involved. I'm just a lamplighter, that's all. Titani, vanished and gone forever somewhere down Hive. I did the best I could. And then I turned and I walked away. I couldn't be blamed for that. Except in my dreams. Little sister, I said, lifting the bottle and taking one last mouthful. I'll always be able to say that clearly, no matter how drunk I was. This time, I didn't dream. That is not the exception to the rule. That is the rule. In the Underhive, all you do is walk away. Life is cheap. Life is short. And in a place where there is just darkness, there's no point in setting a light. Even for someone whose whole job is to light up the Underhive, You just gotta leave it in the darkness and walk away. That is the true horror of the underhives. It doesn't matter which underhive you go to. Human life is cheap. Human life is a struggle. Sometimes in 40k we like to assume the best. Or we like to not think about it. At least that's what I do. But it's moments like these that really do remind me. Whilst there are places like civilized worlds in Warhammer 40k, whilst there are good places in the world to live in, whilst there are great fates, in the grim darkness of the far future, the majority, regardless of how much the majority is, the majority of people live in dark, hopeless horror. There is a reason why signing up to fight demons, chaos space marines, and monstrous war mushrooms is the best alternative for most people. There's a reason why choosing to die in a never-ending pointless war zone is alternative to staying at home. Because in the underhive, all you can do is just walk away and run from your troubles. At least with the guard you can stand and fight, if only for a few seconds. Life in the Imperium is hard. Life in the Imperium is terrible. And whilst that may change from world to world, in the underhives, it is always terrible. For in the grim darkness of the far future, there is no prosperity, there is no hope, there is only pain and suffering. And that is why everything in Warhammer 40k is so much more worse than you think it is. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, thanks so very much for watching. Let me know down below, what do you guys think? Which one of these was your favorite? And did I miss out anything? Is there anything that is really super bad that, people just don't really know that much about? What's your one? Let me know down below. I would love to hear what you guys got to say down below. But I want to say a massive thank you guys for watching, but even more massive thank you to my awesome members and Patreons. Shout out to my Lieutenant tier members, Mr. Eddie V3 and Miss Majora of the Void. Shout out to my Sergeant tier members, Mr. Damiak, Mr. Wolfsmith.Fireheart, Mr. Andy McGee, Mr. Bowen, Mr. Sean IRL7, Mr. Matthew Merrill, Mr. Sergeant Cossack, 68W173D, and Mr. That Guy. Shout out to my corporate tier members, Mr. Tremail the Math Kitty, Lord Rosarius, Tech Priest Toaster, Mr. Bowen, Shauna Smithers, The Gentle Salamander, The Wench of Warhammer, Major Doshinect, Edward King, and Mr. Overanalyze This. And finally, but absolutely not least, shout out to my private tier members, Mr. Thomas Moslons, Mr. Ivan_SBW, Mr. Monkey Man, Mr. Michael Aeda, Mr. Diego Castro, Mr. Fortis Unum, Mr. CMD Nay, Mr. Eric Massaro, Mr. Dar Marek, Mr. Ken_Sakura333, Mr. Adrian Von Furen, Mr. Morally Bankrupt, Mr. Matthew Peter, Mr. Josh Lee 1320, Mr. Adrex X1, Mr. Ethan Elam U71, Mr. Kiri Khan, Mr. Malpace-XB1XE, and Mr. Robert Makorovich. Thank you. I love you, each and every one of you. Thank you so very much, you guys. Oh, you guys are bloody amazing. But time today, well, the memberships get a bunch of awesome benefits, behind the scenes stuff, early access to videos, special roles on the Discord. Join the Discord is bumping, baby. But most of all, you get to support this channel and you get my love and support. But remember, this will always be free. So whether you give your boy $1 or not, I will love you just the same. Mwah! But ladies and gentlemen, I've been the General Bradley 101. You've been beautiful, awesome, and amazing. Thank you so very much for watching. You must just say hello there, boys and girls. And I will catch y'all next time. Dismiss, Rangers. So yeah, it turns out in a setting where the tagline is "In the grim darkness of the far future there is only war," shit is pretty fucked up. Yeah, that tends to slip on the radar sometimes. I'm guilty of that myself. Yeah, 40k, yeah, not nice place. But god damn it, is it fucking cool.